We all have a story. Your story is not my story, and my story is not yours. However, we can find joy, hope, and emotional healing even through our most painful moments in life. Let's walk and take this journey of healing together, one step at a time, because your story does not define you. Hey y'all, welcome back to Your Story Does Not Define Me, the podcast. It's your host here, Dr. Naisha, and I am super excited to have you all join me today. I am really grateful to just be in this space and to have these conversations that we have on this podcast, educating and sharing our stories and just learning and growing. If this is your first time tuning in with us on Your Story Does Not Define You, the podcast, I want to say welcome and thank you for tuning in with us. Look, I want you to take a minute, stop right now, follow this podcast, share this episode with a friend, with your family. Just get the word out. Let people know that we are here, that we are having these conversations, and that this space is a space where we can come together, share our stories, and learn and grow. And if you are tuning in with me again, I want to say thank you for riding out with your girl, for rocking with your girl, and for just being here and being in this space. I truly appreciate it. It means a lot to me each and every time that you join me on Your Story Does Not Define You, the podcast. And so, what is your vibe today? You know, I always have to ask you guys, what is your vibe? My vibe today has been a little chill. I wanted to be a little bit more productive today, but I have been on grandma duty. And so I've been a little chill today, spending time with my grandkids, which I always enjoy. So that is my vibe today. So remember, you get to change your vibe. You can check your mood, change your vibe as many times as you need to. Take advantage of that, reground yourself and reshift yourself as much as you need to, because remember, you control your vibe. All right, y'all? So today I am super excited because we are going to be having a conversation that is going to be so deeply personal for a lot of people. A conversation that sometimes goes unnoticed and doesn't always get talked about. And because this is June, and June is Men's Mental Health and Awareness Month, I just want to have a conversation that we could gear specifically towards men. I know Father's Day is coming up soon, and so just want to have some conversations surrounding men, and then also just conversations to support people. Even though we're going to kind of gear this conversation specifically towards men, this conversation is also applicable to women as well, because we are going to be talking about fatherhood wounds. All right, y'all. And, you know, I always talk about trauma. And as I've shared with you guys many times, you know, trauma is not just something that happened to us, but trauma is also what didn't happen to us, those relationships that didn't happen to us, though that emotional connection that we needed that didn't happen to us. So it's not just what we didn't what we experienced, but it's also what we didn't receive. And so as we have this conversation around fatherhood wounds can develop when, you know, there's an absent father in the home, a father who was not emotionally available, or just who was overcritical, or maybe even abusive or neglectful, and maybe just simply unable to provide the love, safety, and support or affirmation that a child needed when they were younger. And these experiences that people experience, they just don't stay in childhood, but they show up in our adulthood, and they affect in the way that we look at ourselves. They affect our self-esteem, our self-worth, our relationships, our emotional health, our parenting, and even how we understand who we really are. And so I am super excited today because I have a guest that is joining me today. And this person is near and dear to my heart. They are somebody that I know very deeply, and I truly appreciate him for taking the time to be with me today. And my guest today is Mr. Greg Ragle, who is a licensed therapist. He works with individuals that are healing from trauma and navigating through other issues in life. And I am super excited to have him here. So Greg, can I just say thank you for being here with me today?
I appreciate bringing me in, actually, Ms. Davis.
I'm super excited to have you. And so before we get started and dive into this deep conversation, Greg, I just want to ask you, what is your vibe today?
Well, like you said, I was hoping to be more productive. I've already seen clients today, ended my day, and so feeling fulfilled, to be honest with you.
Okay, I love it. Feeling fulfilled. And look, y'all, I didn't tell y'all this, but I've talked about my men's mental health conference that's coming up in the month of July. And Mr. Greg Ragle is one of the speakers. So that even makes this episode even more special to me, that he even took the time to be here today, because he's also going to be one of the speakers at the conference. And I'm super, super excited about that. And so, Greg, can you just tell us a little bit about yourself? I know I shared that you're a therapist, but what are some things that you would like the world to know about you?
Well, actually, I'm on my third career, which has something to do with the teenagers that I work with.
Okay.
I was in the restaurant business for right around 20 years. I actually met Dr. Davis-Massey as social workers with the county here in Kern County, sitting across from each other, which is why we have such a long history. Yeah. And to be honest with you, I look up to Miss Naisha, which is part of what encouraged me to go get my master's degree to become a LMFT.
Oh, thank you, Greg. I call him Ragle, but I'm going to try to keep it professional here and call you Greg or Mr. Ragle, but I do call him Ragle because, as he mentioned, we go way back to the good old days when we worked at the county. So Greg, as we dive into this conversation today, let's just start from the beginning. And so I want to just kind of talk about the term fatherhood wound. Because that term is becoming more common. You know, people talk about it, they say it, but they may not fully understand what that is. So from a clinical perspective, can you just share with us, what is a fatherhood wound or a father wound, and how does it develop?
Well, I'd like to say that you defined it earlier, although the father wound is really not a psychological diagnosis. It is something that we use in the field for the father who has been emotionally unavailable or abusive, potentially inconsistent, and that also could be the father figure. May not actually be the father. It may be the person that we only know to be our father, and suddenly they disappear from our lives for a multitude of reasons,
right.
including loss and incarceration.
Right.
You got to consider that as well,
right.
And it does actually play into what that does to a child who feels emotionally distant, that may internalize certain beliefs through their childhood and into adulthood.
Right. That is so true. And you brought up a really good point, because the father wound doesn't just come from biological fathers. You mentioned about, people that are father figures. And so I know I've always, kind of was told that, the father is the biological one, and then the dad is the person that shows up as that figure, right? So it doesn't have to be a biological father. And so as we have this conversation, we talk about wounds. As I mentioned earlier, trauma is a wound, and the absence of a father, or, the different things that you kind of already shared, those are wounds. So when we think about these wounds, when people hear the word trauma, they often think about abuse. But sometimes the deepest wounds come from what didn't happen rather than what did happen, as I mentioned earlier. And so can emotional absence and lack of affirmation or feeling unseen by a father create trauma just as powerful as more obvious forms of trauma?
Yes, it sure can. I mean, as far as the key question is not whether is it bad enough to be trauma, but how it shaped the person's view of self, others, and their relationships.
Right.
So a child that internalizes, my feelings don't matter. I don't have enough. I haven't earned attention. I'm not worth noticing, or I shouldn't need others. All comes from an absent father figure.
Right. That is so true. And so I, a lot of times, have conversations just with guests and when I'm educating and doing presentations about trauma and about trauma wounds. And lately I've really been talking about, childhood trauma wounds. And so when it comes to these father wounds, many adults don't immediately connect that their current struggles, or their current behavior stem from childhood experiences. But when we think about the father wound and we think about men in specific, what are some signs that an unresolved father wound may be affecting someone's life today?
Well, they can carry anger. They can have grief. They can question why they were not seen. Mm-hmm. Ongoing desire for approval. Mm-hmm. Hoping that one day the relationship will become what they've always needed. It's a constant seeking.
Mm-hmm. So they're always kind of like looking for something, because one of the things that I do, like in my book that I recently published, which I've talked about, It Hurts to Heal, From the Pain of Brokenness to the Blessing of Healing. I have a chapter in that book that specifically talks about, the parent-child relationship, the wounds that people develop as a result of, childhood traumas. And so with the clientele that you work with, because I know you do a lot of work with teenagers as well, what are some of the patterns that you commonly see in your own clients that you notice that these are wounds from, maybe fatherhood wounds or even maybe motherhood wounds?
Well, not exactly that. Not feeling seen. They're many messages that are inherently there that the clients are avoiding certain relationships. They have high anxiety with the fear of abandonment, mm-hmm. Constantly seeking reassurance. Worrying that loved ones will leave, and that those around them are going to disappoint them. Right.
Okay. Now, Greg, because, my experience has been that, men have a difficult time with being vulnerable and with, being present with their emotions, and then even being honest with their emotions. And so for many men, vulnerability is often discouraged from an early age. They're taught to be strong. There's a lot of pressure of showing signs of weakness. So how does the message to be strong, don't cry or man up, complicate the healing process for men who carry father wounds? Maybe you can even share some of your personal experiences. What would you say about that?
Well, I would say that for many men, these messages create a clinical paradox. Mm-hmm. The capacities that support recovery are often the same capacities that were socialized to inhibit. A boy repeatedly exposed to messages such as "be strong, don't cry," and "man up" may learn to manage distress privately rather than identify, express, or seek support for it. So as a result, men present highly functional while remaining disconnected from their internal experiences, which makes us seem cold, distant, and sometimes that internal flame that can result in unintentional blow-ups.
Uh-huh. So would you say that's like like anger? Because I know that a lot of men, a lot of their mental health symptoms shows up as anger. So would you say it's part of that?
It can present as anger at times,
Mm-hmm.
although it is also, when we talk about attachment theory, it's those anxious, avoidant, unsecured feelings that nobody can hold space for you.
Right, right. So since you brought up attachment, because I know attachment has a lot to do also with how people show up in their adulthood and how they present. Would you say those attachment styles are really imperative when it comes to, helping support someone or helping someone to kind of identify where these fatherhood wounds may exist?
Yes, I think you have to explore what attachment looks like for these individuals, and also who are their secure attachments to.
Mm-hmm.
Just because you're afraid to attach to people, but at the same time, sometimes there's a level of overcompensation.
Right.
It's not just in our romantic relationships that this plays out in. It plays out in our personal and professional lives too.
Right. That is so true. That is so true. So let me ask you this, because as you say that, when it comes to like identity and self-worth, I've heard many people describe, spending their entire lives trying to earn the love, approval, or validation that they never received from their fathers. How does a father wound impact a person's self-worth and identity, since we're talking about that?
It can contribute to conditional self-worth.
Uh-huh.
Rather than experiencing worth as stable and intrinsic. An individual may feel value primarily when they are high achieving, providing care to others, people that go into our field.
Right.
Could be that person. And you asked earlier about my own experience. In having this conversation with you, I would say that I've been affected by that.
Mm-hmm.
I have a distant father,
Mm-hmm.
Who prioritizes being a provider over child rearing.
Mm.
So where does that put you as a man or boy trying to grow into a man, and you don't know what that looks like?
Right, right. That is so true. So how would you say that has affected you? Like, where have you seen that show up in your life personally? Like, do you feel like it impacted you in a negative way?
Well, yeah. I would say that up until going to grad school and doing my own personal journey, even when we worked together as social workers, I was still trying to, into my 30s, trying to be a high achiever, being easily triggered by ego as a result of somebody questioning my abilities, and also sometimes, as you would know, in being a social worker, licensed social worker, in social work, we move around a lot.
Right.
They move us programs.
Right.
And whenever you go into a new program, it's like I have to re-earn all of those affirmations I got previously.
Right.
And I second guess myself, or used to second guess myself trying to learn this new project. And I think that also applies to what we call imposter syndrome.
Right.
The lack of being affirmed makes us wonder if we're able to do the work that we do, even as therapists. I mean, I had my first clinical supervisor say, I was I came right out of grad school. They give me an office. What the hell do I know?
So it's that validation piece.
Yes.
Yes. That shows up a lot. Okay, Greg. So I kind of want to go back and I want to talk about, you touched a little bit on relationships and how father wounds affect our relationships. So when it comes to father wounds, they often show up, in our closest relationships with family, with friends, and not necessarily always intimate, like you mentioned. So, how can an unhealthy or painful relationship with the father influence the way that we trust, the way that we love, the way that we communicate, and the way that we connect with other adults?
Well, a distant and critical or emotionally unavailable father may contribute to beliefs that vulnerability is unsafe or that love must be earned. Mm-hmm. This brings about unresolved trauma, grief, anger that may be transmitted generationally through tension, anxiety, emotional avoidance, mm-hmm. and relational instability. Mm-hmm. In addition, our attachment and communication patterns can be avoidant, anxious, disorganized, mm-hmm. And children learn relational expectations within the family environment.
Right.
So while a parent who habitually withdraws emotionally may raise a child who has difficult to identify and expressing their needs, thereby perpetuating a cycle of emotional distance and misattunement within their relationships, interpersonal and intimate.
Wow. That's good. That's good. So since you bring that up and you talk about families and you talk about things being kind of passed down, one of the most heartbreaking realities that I've seen is that unhealed wounds can be passed down from one generation to the next. So how do fatherhood wounds continue across generations, and what does it take to finally break that cycle? Because, a lot of people say generational curses. I like to call it generational patterns or generational cycles, which I do believe things get passed down. But what does it take for, those cycles to finally break, or how do the father wounds, can be broken across generations?
Well, breaking the cycle is increasing awareness of the pattern, developing corrective self-attunement, doing some internal work, parenting that internal child, model healthier relational behaviors, seek create corrective relational experiences, which can come from what we do in therapy.
Right.
Maintaining consistency over time. And even in therapy, sometimes clients tend to not be consistent without even knowing it. We in this field sometimes would say that clients are resistant. Mm-hmm. Sometimes clients don't realize that they're resistant.
It's true.
It's their relational pattern. Right. So in essence, breaking the cycle is less about altering the past and more about increasing awareness, processing the unresolved grief, and practicing emotional attuned relationships in the present, and addressing that injury.
Right. That's true. And you bring up a good point, because a lot of people they don't even know that, these patterns or these cycles even exist. They just kind of feel like, okay, this is how I am, this is how I was raised, this is how I learned to be. So they just automatically assume that certain behaviors and certain things are just a part of who they are. And I know that sometimes people don't recognize, like, even that pain that shows up, like you said, as, unresolved grief, or as anger, as emotional shutdown, or, other destructive behaviors. And so based on your experience and with the work that you do and the clients that you work with, how often do you see that unresolved grief and that fatherhood wounds that, that are disguised as anger or emotional shutdown? or even some of those destructive behaviors? How common do you feel that is?
Well, like you said in the beginning with myself being invited to your men's symposium, this is something that I brought up when we had the discussion about myself being involved. This is being shown up in a lot of my men who are misattuned to their emotions, not knowing how to process their own feelings within their marriages and intimate relationships. I've got one client who has been told that he's emotionally high maintenance because he wants to talk about the feelings that he's having. Men are, I think, trying to be more sensitive to this these days.
Right.
While we're out here talking about emotional intelligence,
right.
Men are not experiencing that when they try to do that.
Right, right. So do you think that's because they're not being supported, they're not being validated? What would you say it is?
Well, I think it comes back to a quote by Brene Brown, who was doing a talk about I believe vulnerability, and she at that point wasn't even studying men.
Wow.
And a man come up to her and told her, I think it's convenient that you talk about shame and being vulnerable, yet you don't say anything about men. And she told him, I don't study men. And he says, I find that convenient because it's the women in my life that are the hardest on me.
Wow.
So we talk about being emotionally intelligent, while at the same time, I think men today are a whole lot more sensitive than they used to be. I'd also bring up the fact that those of us who have young children, the boys are not the ones fighting in school these days. It's the girls, and I know we're talking about men, but men are trying to resolve more conflict these days than to cause it.
Right, right. And I think I could agree with you on that because, I feel like, the more that we have conversations, the more that we provide education, I think it encourages men to tap into that vulnerability a little bit more. I do see, the stigma that still exists. I do see the resistance in men specifically in, tapping into that vulnerability because I think it has a lot to do with the people that are in their life, right? And then just feeling safe. So I had a conversation the other day with a client who was just kind of talking about, he was struggling with trying to learn how to just tap into that vulnerability and, even seeking advice and counsel on, how does he get to the place where he can feel comfortable with even talking to his wife. He mentioned that his wife was his best friend and that he trusts her, but for whatever reason, he still struggled with just even being able to, talk to her and share his truths with her and have that conversation. So I feel like, the more education that continues to happen, the more conversations that continue to happen, that maybe we'll see a bigger breakthrough with men being present with their emotions, which is one reason why I'm super, super excited about the conference that's coming up. Because, there's always so many different things in the world that are geared towards women, that are geared towards youth, but you don't see a lot of things that are geared towards men and tapping into that, emotional connections that, they have, or those feelings that they're holding on to, and just learning how to process and be vulnerable in that.
Yeah, well, I have to tell you that, living here in Bakersfield, we're a blue-collar town. I had never seen a grown man cry until I was in grad school, and it was in class.
Wow.
And this was my first year in grad school, and I'm sitting there in my 40s saying, what the hell is this?
Wow.
What's this guy crying? What's this guy crying for?
Wow.
And I tell some of my own clients, I'm a big John Wick fan, and the ballerina has a title song that hits a little different for me because I'm also a girl dad.
Uh-huh.
But, when we talk about not crying and manning up, what does it mean to throw like a girl? What does it mean to run like a girl?
Right.
And the title song to the ballerina is Fight Like a Girl by Evanescence.
Mm-hmm.
And that's my go-to song right now.
Okay, so what does that song mean to you, Greg? Give us a little insight.
Funny enough, it makes me think of Steve Harvey and his book.
Okay.
Right. And really, you got to be unconventional. You have to look at things from different angles.
Right.
Don't fight in a way that the other person is. Fight in what comes to you. What are your feelings? Where are your feelings coming from?
Right.
Your feelings are valid too, and it comes back to I feel statements. People are not always going to agree with the way you feel, but you have a right to feel the way you do.
Right. That's so true.
And although we're sitting here talking about the father wound, you have a right to feel the way you do. You don't have a right to your behavior.
Right. That's true.
So you can feel the way you do, but when you start displacing those feelings or projecting them, that's your behavior being transferred to somebody else.
Right. Because, feelings show up, emotions show up, and then sometimes people don't know what to do with those. And I think that, for people to understand that whatever feeling that they have, like you said, they have the right to feel that, right? And I often see people struggle with that, especially when it comes to, those parent and child wounds, that when, a person is processing, going through their healing, trying to get to the place of forgiveness, they struggle with the fact that, okay, my parents hurt me or they made me feel this way. And they kind of, feel bad for even having that feeling or that emotion because they feel like, oh, well, they were doing the best that they could, or they said they're sorry, or either they try to overlook it. But one of the things that I often tell people is that, even if you've gotten an apology from your parent, or even if you feel like you've come to the conclusion that you understand that, okay, maybe they had their own trauma and, their trauma showed up in how that they parented them, or either maybe you never got that apology. People want to excuse, what the parent did. But one thing that they don't understand is that whatever feeling that you felt or whatever emotional experience that you had as a result of that relationship, that is still valid. And regardless of how you twist it, turn it, those feelings were real. And those are the things that a person still has an individual responsibility to heal from.
Well, you also got to keep in mind that no two children grow up in the same household.
Oh, yeah.
What's traumatizing to one may not be traumatizing to the other.
Yes, that is so true. That is so true.
In addition, even with the father wound, that same thing can play out in the fact that we're in different places based on the age we are when we have each of those children. Yeah. In my case, I have a sibling that's 14 years younger than I am. Now, come on, that's a major difference in where my father was when he had me compared to when he had my younger brother.
Right. And that does play a part. It does.
So what he got compared to what I got is entirely different.
Yeah, it plays a part. Like, I mean, I can
Yeah.
speak to that too. Like, I also wrote in my book about, the relationship with me and my sister. We grew up in the same home, in my eyes, experiencing the same thing. But even though we grew up in the same home, we both have two different stories of what our childhood was like when it came to certain things. And that's just a testament again that, okay, two people can experience the same type of situation, but have two different perspectives on how that situation affected them, which is why nobody can undervalidate a person's trauma, because who are you to say that they didn't experience that, right? And
Yeah.
so it's very real. So just kind of touching on that and kind of talking about, the healing piece and forgiveness, because I know that's one thing that people often struggle with. And I know a lot of times, when I talk about forgiveness, for me, it has to happen at a time and a space when somebody is ready for that. And forgiveness doesn't always mean that you reconcile, right? And that you move the relationship forward in a certain way. So a question many people struggle with is whether forgiveness is necessary for healing. So from your perspective, Greg, can someone heal from a father wound without reconciling with their father or even forgiving him?
Well, I think that's a two-pronged answer.
Okay.
One is sometimes healing comes through other sources, not replacing the father, but and other healthy relationships can be healing, where you don't reconcile with the father. You have mentors, your therapist, your coach, an uncle, a trusted friend, a healthy partner that, as we say, the ride and die.
Right.
And, the other thing is that you have to forgive yourself as well.
Right.
And you have, you do have a choice to hold on to that.
Right. That's true. Like, I think forgiveness is one of those topics that, look different for everybody, right? I think that the path of forgiveness just looks different for everyone. And I have, different feelings and emotions when it comes to forgiveness. Like, and in some instances, it's harder to get to that place to where you say that you forgive somebody. A lot of times, like you mentioned, forgiveness starts with the person, right? Forgiving yourself for anything that you've taken accountability of that doesn't belong to you. And that's another thing that I talk about in the book too, just about, okay, when you have experienced being wounded by a parent, like what does life look like for you when you move forward? Does it mean that you have to, again, reconcile that relationship and, try to mend it? Or is it okay to set boundaries? And that's one of the things that I tell people, like, it's okay to set boundaries. It doesn't mean that you have to invite that father or that parent back into your life in a certain kind of way. It's okay to, create boundaries that serve you. It doesn't necessarily have to serve the parent, because even if a person was to get that acknowledgement and that accountability from a parent that says, I'm sorry, that I was not there, or I'm sorry that I did, whatever to you, the responsibility of a person's healing is still an individual journey. And so you talked about earlier about, fathers that, maybe were incarcerated, and maybe even fathers that passed away. So what about those individuals whose fathers maybe have passed away when they were younger, or who are incarcerated or have been incarcerated, or maybe they just never even met them at all? How can someone begin healing when they no longer have access to that relationship at all?
Well, that's a very tough thing, because, we have mommy issues, we have daddy issues. Sometimes we'll let somebody else in that's close to the family, and so not ever having that, do we allow somebody else in and bond with that person? Do we worry that person's going to leave us? We need secure attachments in our lives, but I think that also comes back to working with foster children.
Right.
You know, the person who sticks there through those boundary crossings, those trying to push you away, showing that I'm here for you, is probably one of the best things that can happen for somebody who feels that way. And you just don't try to press on them to be in their life. You just stay present for them. They'll come around on their own. And also, I wanted to point out earlier, this generation today is actually leaving their parents behind. And I recently had a teenager who wants to leave Bakersfield, wants to move to Middle America to go to college and never come back.
Wow.
And and this is even a secure attachment, but we're not taking care of our elders even in a positive relationship anymore. So some of these people heal by leaving the environment, getting away from the toxicity of the entire family and never returning. And that, I think that's a little bit sad.
Yeah. I kind of think, because I was going to ask you, like, in regards to that person in particular, because I know that environment does play a big part when it comes to healing and the healing journey. However, for that specific client that you're talking about, do you think that is actually an act of towards their healing journey, or do you think that's an act of avoidance, or, withdrawing, running away? Like, what do you think is your perspective about that?
Well, we're talking about the father wound here, but I would also say that the umbrella parent is the reason why a lot of these kids are doing that.
Right, because that's a form of trauma for them.
Yeah, well, because they're not allowed to make decisions. They want to go out and experience life without being supervised. We're not. I mean, in all honesty, my own daughter didn't start driving until she was 18. So, back when we were kids, we were getting licenses at 16, and
right.
In the great words, Red Bull give you wings. And these our kids are not getting out and being exposed to anything. I mean, God knows, when I was a social worker, I had to investigate somebody whose kid fell out of a tree.
Oh wow!
My God, that's for lack of supervision.
Right.
And my God, when I was a kid, we played tag in trees.
Right. We used to be out in the neighborhood everywhere.
That's right. Be back before the street lights come on. And so, this unhealed trauma from a father wound with an overprotective mother, and not letting these children experience themselves. And I think that also comes back to, women can raise a boy, but they need a man to raise a man.
Right.
A man can raise a little girl, but you need to get a woman in her life at some point to teach her what it's like to be a woman.
Right. It makes a difference.
So I think that applies to the father wound for a woman because she is going to search out in a man what she didn't have in a father,
right?
And he's going to criticize him for the image that she expects from him that he will never be able to live up to.
Right.
Even if he is a healed soul, at some point it's going to be way too much pressure for him.
Right. That's true. Because again, when you have unhealed wounds in your life or unhealed places, those become voids, and people seek out to fulfill those voids. And so, my kids, have fatherhood wounds, and and I see it show up in different areas of their lives, in relationships and the way they interact with people and things like that. So it's a real thing, it really exists. And sometimes people don't really see that. And just, it's a really complex, a complex thing. And it's really something that people have to really take time to really unpack. And then also, that, the complication or the complexity of even, being on that healing journey from those types of wounds are just a little tricky sometimes, right? So for someone listening right now, because this podcast, people are listening all over the world. For someone listening today who recognizes, like, okay, I hear myself, or I see myself in this conversation that you guys are having today, what would you say is like the first practical step towards healing a father wound specifically? And let's take it from a male perspective. What could a man do, to start that healing journey from a father wound?
Well, I don't know that you could nail it down to one specific thing. And I'll be honest with you, my first experience with therapy took me probably 15 years to actually come to grips with what the therapist said to me, which was basically, you need to parent your broken child.
Right.
And it wasn't until I was halfway through grad school that I understood that. Right. So really, we need to reparent that inner child.
Right.
Because why does that matter? Healing often involves learning to give yourself what you did not receive.
Yes, that part.
Seeking supportive relationships. Why does that matter?
Right.
Consistent care helps repair patterns of mistrust and fear.
Right.
And then we need to practice healthy boundaries.
Right.
And that's one of the things that I'll be talking about in my presentation at your
the symposium
presentation. Boundaries reinforce safety, respect, and self-worth. And we all have non-negotiables. We also have negotiables. And then I have something that I tell my clients. We also have those growing edges. And those are those things that come to light at different parts of our lives. And we have to evaluate bringing those forth. Is that something that we want as a healthy boundary? Right. Is it a negotiable, or is it a non-negotiable? Right. And sometimes that happens through broken relationships. You build more non-negotiable boundaries, but does your list get too long to have a healthy relationship?
Right. That's so true. And you touched on some really good things, because like you mentioned, there's no chronological order per se when it comes to healing. But for me, I from my perspective, I feel like there's a first step. And for me, that first step is that acknowledgement piece. I don't know what your thoughts are about that, but for me, that's the first step when it comes to healing, that I often say you can't heal what you won't acknowledge. And if you don't acknowledge that a fatherhood wound exists, then how can you even begin to, heal? And so you brought up some really good points, talking about that path to healing, because again, in my book, I talk about the same thing. So if you haven't, you listeners out there, if you haven't purchased my new book, you definitely need to purchase It Hurts to Heal, From the Pain of Brokenness to the Blessing of Healing, by Dr. Naisha Davis-Massey. You can purchase it on Amazon or anywhere books are sold. Or you could also go to my website, drnaishaDavisMassey.com, because in the book, I do talk about exactly what you're talking about, Greg, about that reparenting piece, because you have to give yourself what you did not receive. And I know for some people that sounds hard, because they're probably saying like, well, how do I do that? Right. But again, in that book, there's that chapter that specifically talks about, parenting, and then also about healing that inner child. And, even getting on that journey of healing, a lot of people are afraid of it, but I, just want to share that, once you take that step, it is so rewarding. It's so profound to even take that step towards healing. And so Greg, as we kind of like, come to a close and begin to close out this episode, the fatherhood wound conversation, as we discussed, it can show up in so many different ways in men, because men are, as we've been saying, are, taught to suppress emotions. They're taught to, not talk about things. They rather go through the pain, instead of just saying I'm hurt. They struggle with that constant seeking validation, like we discussed. Difficulty expressing those emotions, that fear of failure, relationship struggles, anger and emotional reactivity, overcompensating, like you mentioned earlier, through their hypermasculinity, struggles with fatherhood, and just the fear of becoming a father themselves, feeling unsure how to even show that affection, or becoming emotionally distanced, or even feeling overwhelmed by parenting, and just those additional mental struggles that we talked about, because of those unhealed father wounds that show up in depression and anxiety, sometimes substance abuse, stress, low self-esteem, or just even those feelings of emptiness. And so, Greg, this has been such a powerful conversation, and you've shared a lot of information and insight on what a father wound looks like. So, for the person listening who still feels abandoned or rejected or unseen, or just feels unworthy because of their relationship with their father, what would you say? What would you say to that man, or what would you want that man to know today?
Well, there's two things. One, healing is gradual, and each new response strengthens your self-worth. And my core principle would be this: healing is not about fixing your father. It's about reclaiming your life, worth, and capacity to love and be loved authentically.
Wow, that's amazing. I love that. And once again, this has been such a powerful and so necessary conversation, and I'm super, super excited to hear you at the conference next month. It Hurts to Heal, the Brotherhood Experience. I'm super excited to hear you, expand more on your topic, which I know you're going to be talking more about that masculinity, and, tapping into those emotions. And so, as we kind of wrap up this conversation for the listeners out there, I just want to say that, fatherhood wounds are real. Father wounds are real. But they don't have to define the rest of our lives, right? They don't have to define you. Like we've talked about, healing is possible, and awareness is possible, and breaking those unhealthy cycles is possible. And we do that by acknowledgement, through education. And, we've learned that today. And I just want to take this time and say thank you again, Greg, for sharing your wisdom and your insight and helping us to better understand this journey, from healing from these father wounds. And to our listeners out there, if today's conversation resonated with you, please know that seeking support is not weakness, it's courage. So Greg, for those out there who may feel like, I really enjoyed you, how can somebody get in contact with you?
Well, I do my practice through two different platforms, and I see clients virtually. I do have clients in Bakersfield that I only see virtually, but I also have an office on 18th Street, which is on my Psychology Today, where you can find any therapist in any state, and our bios are on there to find somebody that suits your personality, what you need, but through Rula and Growth Therapy, those are the two platforms that I use. I haven't moved into accepting cash pay clients on my own, but that is something I hope to do in the future. I have been in private practice for about 2 years at this point, so I'm still working out some of the kinks for myself.
Right. Okay. It's a process. It's definitely a process.
Yeah.
I've learned a lot as I've, learned hitting some bumps in the road, but it was good to have, experienced those things. So but yeah, for those of you out there, if you, if this conversation resonated with you again and you're interested in reaching out to Greg, please do so. I'll put his information, check it out in the chat, and just remember that, fatherhood wound isn't just about the relationship that you had with your father, but it's also about the relationship that you develop with yourself because of it. And I just want you to know that healing begins, as a man, when you realize that your worth was never dependent on whether your father knew how to love you well or not. But take that journey, take that step, and begin your healing journey. Once again, Dr. Naisha here. Definitely thank you for tuning in with us today on this conversation. Send me an email if you have any questions or if you have anything that you want to add or shed light on anything. I love to get your comments and I love to get your feedback. So until next time, until the next episode, be well, take care. And if nobody ever told you that they love you, I love you. And I'm always here to support you and rooting for you. Thank you again.